Welcome to this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Today we have two veteran product and engineering leaders who once yelled at each other as VPs, and they both dive deep with me into the world of data today. We'll explore the rise of the Lakehouse architecture and the modern day VHS versus Betamax battle of open data formats. Plus, discover the evolving challenges of data movement and how enterprises are truly leveraging AI with their proprietary information. Whether or not there is any yelling in this podcast, I will not say. Welcome to this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Today we have two veteran product and engineering leaders who once yelled at each other as VPs, and they both dive deep with me into the world of data today. We'll explore the rise of the Lakehouse architecture and the modern day VHS versus Betamax battle of open data formats. Plus, discover the evolving challenges of data movement and how enterprises are truly leveraging AI with their proprietary information. Whether or not there is any yelling in this podcast, I will not say. All right, really excited about this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Today, we have two amazing veteran product and engineering leaders who have really deep backgrounds in all things data. We have Anjan. Anjan is a Chief Product Officer at Fivetran, and he was previously Chief Product Officer at Precisely. And we have Chandler, who is most recently Chief Product Officer at EnterpriseDB. And before that, he was General Manager for all things Kubernetes, Hybrid and Edge at AWS. Welcome to the podcast, Chandler and Anjan. Really excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Vidya. Excited to be on. And obviously, I've known Chandler for a long time, so excited to kind of do this with him.
Yeah, it's great doing a podcast with Anjan. I was telling Vidya before the show started that our relationship has taken a long journey from yelling at each other between VP and product and VP ends in each other's offices to now doing a podcast together 10 years later. So it's a really cool relationship.
That is crazy. So between the two of you, who was VP Eng and who was VP Product?
Anjan thought he was both. And
that's probably accurate. Chandler ran engineering, I did product, but
Okay.
it was a good relationship where we were kind of swapping hats quite a bit, I would say. So it's like one of the symbiotic relationships where we actually ended up shipping a pretty cool product.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was very, very challenging and lots of big characters and really cool technology. And it was a really cool
That is
time.
awesome. I think the most awesome thing is that you've been friends 10 years after that, and you still continue to talk to each other and keep recommending each other too. That's amazing.
Totally.
That's a very special product and engineering relationship. Awesome. So let's switch to the topic of the podcast. So for the longest time, we were talking about data, right? Day in and day out. And then obviously these days, AI has taken over as the central topic, especially in boardrooms. But in this podcast, in this particular episode, we want to get back to the basics because AI wouldn't exist without all of that amazing data. Obviously, there's a lot that's happened in terms of the evolution of storage, compute, and algorithms. So just to get grounded on where things are, I wanted to pick the topic of the Lakehouse. Obviously, this term didn't exist a few years ago. This, though, now is the predominant enterprise data architecture, and it's riding on some of the things, the advances that I just mentioned. And the beauty of this is now users can get ACID transactions. They can have like one architecture that supports BI, AI, ML, all of that good stuff. So basically the best of both data lakes and warehouses. However, we have at least three open data table formats. So there's Delta Lake, Iceberg, and Hudi. And this kind of evokes the notorious situation we had with VHS and Betamax, right? And one can say, okay, the consumer eventually wins, but in the land of the enterprise, it can lead to a lot of anxiety and useless work before things settle down. So Being veterans in both engineering and data, curious to hear your take on how you think this will unfold or maybe unfolding. Let's just start there. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I could add a couple things and then Chandler jump in. Generally, we see Iceberg and Delta, and in particular, Iceberg really kind of doing well. And it's good to see, like, if you go look at the ecosystem, Databricks was kind of being behind Delta for a long time, but ended up buying Tabular, which was kind of the committers from Iceberg. So they're also embracing that. So I would say those are kind of ending up as kind of the core table formats, and Iceberg in particular is probably leading that race. If you kind of think about, like, I don't know if Lakehouse architecture is that unique and new. This concept of separation of storage and compute, we've had it in the Hadoop days, it just didn't take off. And now I kind of see a couple of massive benefits. One, you mentioned having your data one location, structured, unstructured, and then with AI agents and RAG and so on, it's become way more important that the customers do that. I think second, often what we see with customers is they kind of have lots of query engines, or they make copies of data. They can't have one independent storage layer and go access multiple query engines. That's the main benefit adopting this architecture. And they could go and say, hey, for ML based use cases, I'm going to go use this query engine. For more traditional data warehousing, I may pick a different query engine. Or I may go use an open source query engine like DuckDB for part of the data that is not highly scalable. So it's about choice, and it also gives them sort of, it future proofs them in terms of where they want to go. They go invest in their storage layer. They should own it, and then customers, and they can kind of pick the analytical query engines that they want to go. So I think you're seeing this kind of being the first class architecture, and a lot of CDOs and CIOs kind of are thinking that from first principles that this is the approach they want to take. The great thing that I'm seeing now is the ecosystem is supporting, right? If you kind of look at major companies like Snowflake and Databricks, or even Redshift or Google, they're all kind of getting behind an open ecosystem. And the last thing I'll say is there's also the role of a catalog has gone up. So, and this is the catalog for Iceberg or Delta, and that's playing an important role. And it's important for customers to also have a open catalog. So don't pick a open table format, an open object storage that you can kind of pick, but then don't get logged into the catalog from a vendor. Also kind of think through having an open stance there is what I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So just one follow-up question. You made a lot of good points, Anjan. One thing I just want to make sure I understood correctly. So you're saying with this trend, customers are not going to have to or want to copy data, but rather stick, if they have, like, without replicating data, they just have multiple query engines perform like different use cases as the need be. Did I understand that correctly?
That's the biggest draw for this. So you could determine, I want to go use one query engine for all my use cases. And you determine, hey, that changes over time. You want to migrate from one to the other or use multiple. Yeah. So I think there's sort of many flavors of this. Even within a company, you'll often see customers using different. So it's like, but they're sort of siloed off, right? Like I have some data here, and the marketing team is doing some data, and the IT team is doing some data. And at some point, they want to replicate data from one ecosystem to another ecosystem, and those projects often fail. So, and now with AI, you really want access to all this data in one place. So it's a good architecture to enable this. It's architecture plus also the ecosystem, right? Ecosystem is really, everyone's behind this now. All the data, we're part of this, the company that I'm part of, but everybody that you see from a vendor landscape point of view is also pushing this.
Totally.
And I think it's really interesting to see how the community has rallied around specifically Iceberg, really. I think if Databricks could have their way, I'm sure they would prefer everyone have used Delta Lake. But just as with any kind of technology, I don't know, battle like this, we saw this with in the Kubernetes ecosystem with Mesos when I was at Mesosphere and Kubernetes and things like this. But when multiple companies start to rally around a single technology and you really see the momentum going that direction, I think that's where you start to see more innovation headed in that direction as well. There's nothing scarier than as a head of engineering or head of product having to make these technology decisions at a vendor you don't want to make the wrong one. You don't want to get locked into something and then have to migrate everything off in a few years. That's just a big waste of time and money. So yeah, I think Hoodie's really interesting. It's a little bit different use case, but Uber has done most of the work behind that. But with Iceberg, I think Anjan was right. That acquisition of Tabular kind of gave a lot of people a signal that like, hey, it looks like not only are a lot of vendors and clouds rallying around Iceberg, it looks like Databricks might be seeing those trends as well and wanting to invest there.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say perhaps is like even customers starting on Delta, because in the end, it's just the table format. Underlying is just a Parquet file. So if you're in Delta and there's like a lot of innovation happening from Iceberg and then also from the Delta side, it won't be that hard for you to have a Iceberg compliant query engine read Delta files or vice versa. And you're already seeing that. It won't be, if you pick Delta, it'll be fine. If you pick Iceberg, it'll be fine. So totally. I think that's kind of where the ecosystem's going.
Yep. Yeah, I think the beauty of this is, Anjana, as you pointed out, it's not just the products and technologies, but the ecosystem is there and supporting these formats. And Chandler, as you pointed out, you don't want to be in the shoes of an engineering VP who's going to have to like bet on a startup or a technology only for that to get obsolete or being surpassed by something else. So I think this is definitely win-win for customers. Now, Anjan, you made a point about, or one of the use cases that you called out, why this is a huge win for customers is that they don't have to replicate their data, leave it where it is, and then have different query engines, depending upon what they want to do with that data, go at the same storage. You work at a company, you famously call it a data movement company. What does this mean for you or data movement in general?
This is good for us because we launched a product to kind of embrace this trend. It's called Managed Data Lake product, and we help customers move data to Iceberg or Delta, and we help customers then go support the various query engines, and then we have a catalog. So in some sense, it's good for us because we've been on the front of this and optimizing customers on the cost side with our product. I don't want to kind of make this about Fivetran, but customers save significantly on ingestion costs and so on. So we've done some massive innovation to write it in a very performant way for these formats. And Fivetran's been at it for a good 3 years on this problem. So pretty excited about this trend.
So it's great that, data movement company like Fivetran is able to capitalize on this as a trend because obviously customers who are not on one of these open formats would want to move their data to a format where they can capitalize on the separation of storage compute, leverage multiple engines, whatnot. But what about like the typical or the more historical use case for which Fivetran might have been used for? So move it, for the purpose of replication. Is that still a thing? And if so, are there like pockets where that actually still would make sense?
Yeah, look, I think customers, whether they're replicating to Iceberg or replicating to Snowflake or Databricks, that use case only grows. And the reason that grows is the amount of data that customers are creating continues to increase, right? Whether that's on-prem, SaaS applications, we're getting more SaaS applications. Now we're getting AI applications. You're getting more data and data. And all of that in operational applications and databases needs to end up in an analytical. And that's spread across various domains. So what we see is that continues to grow, right? That problem only gets worse with sort of the increase in data. So we see more applications, more databases, and all of that data and has to now end up in one location, whether using a data lake or using your standard data warehouse or a runtime engine.
As we start to see all these new AI use cases as well, and even like crazy things like robotics, data is going to be created in all sorts of different places, and you have to eventually get it to your data lake or your data warehouse or wherever you want it to be eventually. So I think I agree with Anjan. I think the more use cases that come online that generate new types of data, the more we're going to need to move it around and find places for it to land and have it in consistent formats and put it in Parquet files and all these different things that you have to do to it.
So even if the destination is maybe getting consolidated, especially if companies standardize on specific storage technologies, the source of that is still only increasing. There's more quantity and there are just more and more sources of data, be it in robotics, like you pointed out, or other traditional or AI applications. So that problem is still a growing one.
Even just SaaS applications, right? Like the number of SaaS applications customers are using is only increasing. And you'll be surprised how much operational data that customers have is in those applications. Databases are only growing. So in some sense, your traditional how you run your business, where insight is, that's only growing. And then before, there's like another sort of dimension to this, which is kind of like unstructured data. And like customers didn't even care about moving unstructured data. And often folks think that unstructured data is only in docs or so on, but no, it's actually in your Salesforce. It's in your NetSuite. You have docs in Salesforce. You have this additional unstructured data in all these locations. And now customers are interested in, how do I move that? Because with BI, you couldn't do much with it, or your traditional analytics, but a large language model can really consume this information and you get a ton more insight from it. So if you're not putting all of that in one location, then you're missing out.
That's a fascinating point. I didn't think about people wanting to move unstructured data, but it makes a lot of sense. And actually, it's a good segue into, all three of us are old enough to remember that before ELT, there was ETL, right? And then in 2010, 2015, of course, Fivetran is one of those dominant players which made ELT, so extract, load, and transform approach, more popular than the previous, where you extract, you transform, and then load, more popular. So with unstructured data in particular, Anjan, do you see there's a use case for maybe doing a little bit more pre-processing before loading up all of that? Or is that like not the case? Are there any specific performance or latency benefits that might come from switching things around slightly?
It's actually the opposite of what we've seen, because with unstructured data, you kind of have to do, for example, if you're using a RAG use case, there's a ton of things that go in there. Although I have some points of view on RAG, maybe we can chat about that later. You have to vectorize it. You have to kind of create embeddings, and then you have to chunk it. A lot of that, and then you need to kind of understand the ontology for that specific source. All of that post-processing, like now you're getting great capabilities from Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift or pick your cloud vendor, right? So you need to kind of think through all of that, and it's very hard to do that at the source. And so the trend we are seeing is it's actually more post-processing, a lot more post-processing you need to do on unstructured data.
Interesting. And Chandler, you have done a lot with Edge in your career. What do you think about the same topic, but like in terms of processing at the edge? Like, does ELT, ETL, does that, like, the trend towards doing ELT stays the same for, I don't know, pick your edge applications of choice?
That's really the challenge with Edge, especially the term Edge, because there's a lot of things that can fall in that bucket. Typically, when a lot of folks think of Edge, they think of sensors that what would I think now be called the far edge. We put another word in front of it, but kind of the sensors in your warehouse or your factory or wherever you might have it. That's just an example of a use case for the far edge. Those sensors generate a lot of data. In my opinion, I still see a lot of those customers sending that data back to the cloud to do processing with it. Very few of them are standing up, servers or data centers near those locations that do the processing. So you'll see a lot of movement of that data still going back to the cloud to take advantage of kind of that elastic compute layer there. And I think that's, again, where you'll see a lot of all these AI technologies being stood up by your kind of classic cloud vendors to take advantage of that kind of data. And yeah, it's a really interesting time there.
Yeah. And speaking of AI, we've obviously come a long way from using machine learning, supervised machine learning, when a lot of the challenge that enterprise teams had was in data wrangling to make sense of that data and then to get any insights. We've gone from that to using off-the-shelf AI models, right? And these are now fairly mainstream. So we have the bottleneck. I mean, it seems to me must have shifted as it comes to enterprise data teams where they're stuck. If it was in data wrangling before, I'm curious to know, with the number of pre-trained language and vision models that companies have at their disposal these days, what are you all seeing as the key bottleneck for data practitioners?
I think for a lot of companies, there's two big things that are coming up. The first is, how do they get their data prepared in a way that it can take advantage of these new AI models? So you might be able to easily access OpenAPI's API layer or Cloud's APIs and be able to send queries to it to make some application. Let's say you're an insurance company, I don't know, State Farm or something, and you want to generate some kind of chatbot for your customers. You might easily be able to send queries and different things to those API layers, but how do you take all of your existing data that's inside of State Farm to make that's proprietary, that those off-the-shelf models weren't trained on, And how do you bring that up? And that's where stuff like RAG, like Anjan was talking about, or there's a lot of other techniques people are looking into as well. That's where that starts to come into play. And those are the companies I've been looking at most closely recently. I find that area, especially for the enterprise, the most transformative. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of innovation, a lot of companies trying to solve that problem for their customers. I know, Anjan, I know you're working on some of that stuff as well.
It's interesting. Maybe I'll provide a couple of different points. I agree with Chandler saying. One, there's a lot of change, and models are changing, concepts are changing, context. Like, there's a lot of change that's happening. And when I talk to customers, they're almost like, what do we do? Like, what was relevant 3 months ago is not. So the rate at which it's almost like we're used to software changing a few months, right? Like major versions every few months, but like a model is turning over like every 3 months. So the rate at which models are changing is way more rapid. So it's kind of causing some churn as you think through it. I do see one other change that's kind of happening, right? One, for a long time, models weren't as good. With context window, we kind of created this secondary thing called RAG, where you had to kind of go create a data set, we search through it, and then we feed some relevant context to the models. And I wonder if that model is changing now, where models are kind of becoming more intelligent, they can reason. We've got a new interface that's emerging with model context protocol, and the models can themselves go and search and do the tasks. And maybe that makes RAG not as important or relevant. We'll see. So again, this is like all companies were like betting on RAG and they're thinking about it. And all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, do I need to build an agent with MCP or do I need to do RAG? And we're not talking years. We're talking like last year versus now.
Yeah.
And that's like so in some sense, but on the flip side, yeah, you're seeing tons of new use cases, ton of capability that was not possible before. So it's, I would say, a very interesting time in software. And you can kind of vibe code with Cursor, which was not possible, or Claude Code. So a lot going on.
Yeah. So it sounds like in some ways the problem is still somewhat in the domain of like there is the standard stuff. Like earlier it used to be, whatever algorithm that was in Spark ML or whatever, and then how do I make it work on my data that is sitting in my Hadoop cluster? Versus now, again, there may be some off-the-shelf model that is really cool, but then I have all these internal documents that's proprietary. How do I make sure that I leverage that LLM against my proprietary stuff in a way that, that the application can work elegantly, whether that be using RAG or MCP in conjunction with agents, those are all details that obviously will get sorted out, is being sorted out as we speak, but it still looks like the internal context and the equivalent of that. It sounds like data wrangling to me still. Maybe there's a newer word for that, but that still seems to be the thing that enterprises have to overcome.
Yeah, my hot take on this is that we're really, really early still, only because I don't see a lot of use cases yet. I actually, just as a consumer, you don't see a lot. You're not interacting with a lot of brand new AI applications coming out of these enterprises yet, which just tells you, and as a vendor, I saw this as well working with customers, that everyone's still trying to figure it out. How do we build really meaningful AI applications? Where do we even start? What applications do we want? And then how do we use our data in an effective way to augment those applications we want to build? It's a big challenge still. I think a lot of companies are still trying to wrap their heads around what do we even do with this AI stuff, while vendors are building furiously to try to start to solve some of these problems. And it's very, very early still.
Yeah, if you don't have your data in one place, you don't have good privacy controls, governance, you haven't cataloged your data, kind of the things you need for good data hygiene, then like it's really hard for you to solve these advanced AI problems.
Yeah.
In some of these early RAG conversations, I'd often hear about the thing that would catch them is permissions controls. Like, who has access to these docs? How do you, who can then search across them? And so you're kind of stuck on a very primitive permissions issue that a lot of customers haven't solved. So go solve those.
100%. Want to ask you a little bit more of an operational question, especially to you, Chandler. You were heading engineering role, and agile teams obviously over the last few years have adopted, for the most part, continuous integration, continuous delivery. And for the longest time, we were complaining that has never seen the light of the day with data, right? And now, before you know it, we've moved on to introducing LLMs into our development workflow. only moving us even farther from the goal of reaching
Sure.
any semblance of CI/CD. I'm curious to hear from your point of view. Like, is that even a realistic goal to achieve at some point? And like, given the arc of technology growth and evolution you've seen in the past decade or so, how do you think this will all shape up, especially when we introduced these LLMs or vision models into the workflow here? The whole notion of CI/CD, is that even
Yeah.
going to be a thing?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think a lot of companies that were building consumer applications made that CI/CD world really popular. You saw like Netflix and Airbnb,
Hmm.
and these folks that were able to do thousands of releases a day, and they were able to A/B test them across tens of thousands, maybe millions of customers. I know the Amazon.com, the actual store does a lot of those techniques as well. And they really pushed the envelope on what was possible for software delivery. And there's a lot of really awesome tooling that came out to help support that, so that you could do the thousands of releases a day to your main branch. You didn't see that as much in the enterprise. There's a lot of enterprises that never did that, never went down that path. And a lot of that had to do with who their customers were. I know a lot of my customers, they didn't want more than 2 releases a year. And I know the Kubernetes community was getting pushed to do less releases a year. We can't consume this many versions of Kubernetes. And, they only supported 2 versions back. And they're like, stop, please. Like a lot of people consuming Kubernetes would prefer to have 1 release a year, probably, or 1 release every 2 years, because it was just too much to upgrade. There's just too many things to do to try to change your workflow that often. So, even though I think we heard a lot about CI/CD, and obviously where applicable, those best practices were pushed into lots of different software organizations, very few actually got to the pinnacle of what was possible. And some of that was really driven by who their customers were and if they could even handle that. So I felt that I always thought that was really interesting. There was always a lot of talk about it, but you would join a leading edge company like AWS, and they're like, whoa, we're not going to be shipping
Yeah, that's
quite
a
like
great
that.
point. Depends on what you were shipping and for who.
Exactly. And I think the same thing is going to happen with data as well. And you're going to see the same thing with AI. You'll have models trained on your data, and you'll say, okay, this model works great. Please don't mess with it. And your company will generate a whole bunch of new data, and somebody will want to be continuously updating it. And you'll say, no, we want our application to be based on this old set, right? And so those
Hmm.
types of things are going to happen as well. And you already see that. Claude 3.5 is actually, in my opinion, I've been using Cursor on some side projects recently. I'm like, I think 3.5 is better than the new model. And I don't even like their new models much. It seems to give me bad answers more often, right? So I'm using the old stuff. So, it always really
Yep.
depends. And I guess my overall point here is just that even though there are these hype cycles in our industry that come around, and these paradigms of CI/CD or Agile or different things, it really depends on the company and the use case on how those are adopted.
Hmm. Hmm. Makes a lot of sense. Cool. Switching topics. So this is about bringing intelligence inside databases. I don't regard myself as a genius, but it didn't take me much to realize several years ago that databases could be more intelligent. It's not obviously as simple as sticking in a UDF, a user-defined function within a database, but especially, given what we just discussed about a RAG-based application, the question is, could these things be powered off of a database directly? And obviously, one school of thought is this is what vector databases are meant to be. Even if this is in the land of unstructured data, obviously there are companies like Snowflake, like Anjan was mentioning, and maybe Chandler, you were mentioning too, that there's a lot of, like, you call it post processing, but there's a lot of intelligence that is getting baked into these machines. But really, what do we think, like, especially given both of your long careers in data, what do you think would be the future of databases? Like, do you at all believe that intelligence will move into database, or do you not think so?
I'll give my view, and maybe a more traditional view. Like a database should do what a database is good at, right? Store data, be very efficient in terms of querying and performance and so on. I don't understand why you need to push that intelligence in the database. The models can get really good, and they can go and perform tasks such as tuning them or querying them. You're already seeing that. with Claude and OpenAI and so on. And you could perhaps write a query in natural language and translate that. So I think the usage will improve. Perhaps everybody gets their own AI DBA. I can kind of see that. And so you're kind of using often if you go poll 10 Postgres users, I would get 8 of them are running that in a suboptimal way in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a challenge there is how do you use your databases? They're pretty powerful now, but often we don't use them in the right context or the right setting or the right even schemas. So it's just basics that don't get used. So I think we have a lot of room there where AI can play a big role in like helping that company with 3 IT folks and leveraging that. So I think that's my view. We'll see where this goes, but
So
and the
you're
models
making
can be like an assistant, like a bionic DBA. I envision everybody to have a bionic DBA that helps you with it. Maybe, yeah, it's kind of my view.
So it sounds like, Anjan, you're arguing for intelligence databases with intelligence rather than intelligence residing inside databases. But why not that too? Like, what's your, if I
Yeah,
can
I mean,
push you on that?
just from a pure technical point of view, like it should be persistence, it should be query, and then you have a separate sort of model where they can kind of go and help you. I don't know. You need to go. It'll be very dependent, right? You need to understand context. So the way you tune your queries, you may need to go understand how users are using it, seasonality. You need to go look at a bunch of other things. So pushing that in the database doesn't quite make sense to me, but that's kind of what a DBA does today, or your DevOps people do today, your SRE. So you could say AI playing a strong role there,
Mm-hmm.
and like pushing that into the database. Who knows, but I don't quite see it.
Mm.
It's a really interesting topic, obviously. I think the world has kind of, since Anjan and I actually first started working together, I remember there was a lot of new database technology coming out to fit very specific use cases. I need a really fast query that can run against this data that has to be structured in a columnar way. So I need a columnar database. And then, okay, I have all this JSON data and I don't want to restructure it, so I need a document database. And you started adding all this stuff to your stack, and sooner and later, over just 3 or 4 years, you went from having maybe 1 or 2 RDBMSs in your technology stack to having 10 or 15 or more. And you started getting all these very specialized use cases, solving them with a specialized technology or specialized database. And now I feel like, similar to what Anjan is saying, people are turning that back around the other way. And they're saying, can we simplify? We have too much. We're paying too many vendors. I saw a lot of this happen in 2020 when the industry started slowing down and a lot of people were trying to cut costs. And, people said, can we just do this with Mongo? Can we just do this with Postgres? Can we put that on S3? Can we simplify this? And I think the same thing is going to happen with AI, to be honest. Elastic, for example, is doing some really great, cool stuff with RAG. I mean, you can just see it on their website. So is Mongo. So are some, Postgres vendors. And there's some really interesting things happening there. And do you need a specialized new database specifically to store vectors, for example? I would guess the answer is no. A lot of people can already do that. And we're doing that before this AI boom happened.
And do you even need vectors?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah,
Give it another 6 months and you may not even need that. Like, why create this additional redirection and an additional storage layer when you just go access the data that you already have?
Yeah.
Right. I just think companies should be very careful to jump on, these hype trains before they really dig into, okay, what are we building? Can we do it with existing technology? Sure, there might be some optimization that we get from using this cutting edge new database technology, but is that really needed? And are we planning for scenarios that we might not ever even get to as far as scale or, the number of users we're going to have? And can we just tackle this in chunks instead? And I would generally greatly advise companies to take a hard look before they adopt some of this new stuff.
That's a great point. I mean, it sounds like, if I were to distill what the two of you are saying, it sounds like whether it be embeddings or RAG, these are all primitives that we are using in order to help machines get us the intelligence we need. Whereas the way that I couched this question was, can we get all the intelligence out of a box? And I think what you're both saying is that we're not quite there yet. But we still need to be careful about what we are anchoring on, because those primitives, they keep changing. And we just need to make sure that we're not over indexing on those and adopt a new technology just because we think that primitive is the thing that will get us closer to the intelligence we're all seeking. So I think that's how I'm interpreting what you're saying. Cool. last topic here for us. So, Anjan, you were both chief product officer, and Anjan, for a while, it looked like you felt like you had both the role of a product and engineering person. But that aside,
Only a Chandler.
only the Chandler. Okay, all right. Point noted. Hopefully, everybody that works with Anjan heard this too. So, actually, I was here. So, on the role of product manager in these days, right? I was actually hearing a PM talking to another PM, some random place, that they stuck the entire PRD in a coding assistant, and they expected, the coding assistant to spit out the app, but it apparently didn't do a great job. I guess no surprise. The point I'm trying to make is this is kind of the expectation I think a lot of younger people in particular are going to have. Things are trending in that direction. So I have a very fundamental question about what you both see as the current role of a PM and how you think it's going to evolve. So both today, where obviously there's probably some LLM in the workflow, but also like if you picture yourself as a PM a few years out from now, how do you think the workflow and what you do changes?
It's a good question. I view the role of the PM in a few ways. Yeah, basically doing research, talking to customers, having clarity, providing clarity to engineering what you build, and then eventually driving adoption for the feature you're building and driving revenue. It's hard to drive revenue through an LLM. I don't know how that world changes. So perhaps a PM gets assistance, right? You can do research more easily. You can talk to customers more easily. So synthesizing information and reading gets easier, but you still have to go drive adoption. So more PMs probably are going to spend more time thinking about the business aspects. And maybe you get a lift from LLMs on the research side. I don't know if the role evolves as much. Perhaps some parts of the job are easily, you get a catalyst in terms of what you could do. Some parts, probably not. But I was chatting with another CPO recently, and we were kind of chatting about the same topic. And we wonder where PMs as GMs kind of becomes a thing going forward, where you're thinking about the business more. You still have to drive the capabilities, but fundamentally, companies will look for PMs to be driving the business just as much as the product, given that you're getting such an assist from AI. It'd be very interesting.
Finally, right? Finally, we get there. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Waited
So that
all
would
my
be
career and gave up.
you often kind of had the bandwidth issue. So if
Yep.
AI is kind of helping you in some ways. So I think also then are very correlated with what the company needs. So it's very aligned. So I think the role itself will, I think, remain fundamental to how companies drive growth. So I don't think that changes. But perhaps the day-to-day, maybe the PM can outsource some tasks to an AI and focus on more strategic things, perhaps.
Cool. That is super interesting. Chandler, what do you think?
I don't buy the AI is going to replace all their jobs thing as much as some people do. I agree with Anjan. I think the world is moving really quick, and AI is going to change a lot of stuff. I think we have decades before we really, really notice a significant change, at least 10 years, especially for software engineers and PMs. I think software engineers are going to get better. They're going to get faster. Some of them are going to get worse because they don't have to learn the fundamentals as much, probably. And they're going to rely on these coding assistants to do a lot for them. And these senior engineers are going to bail them out, is my guess. But I think overall, software is going to get better with AI. People are going to be able to move faster, build the simple features a lot faster, and take a lot of that work off their plate so they can focus on, more complex problems. I think PMs are going to be able to get access to data easier and ask questions and be able to answer questions with data more than they do with their gut. I think anybody who works in product knows that a lot of your day is just making decisions. Do I pull my team off of this to work on this? Should I prioritize this over this? And your boss is always asking you to give them data. And why did you make that decision? What data are you using to make that decision? And I think AI is going to help PMs a lot. So I see it more as augmenting our roles. I think our jobs are going to get not necessarily easier, but we're going to be able to do them better. I think certain software engineering tasks are going to be a lot easier. But I do think we're a long way away from this cyborg replacing all of our jobs. And
for sure.
And we can just, sit back and find some new hobby to do. But I think AI is the more tooling that comes out, the more I'm able to use it, the more excited I get about it. But the more I also realize we're a long way away from this really being the.
I do think engineer or a product manager that leverages AI more is going to be more valuable than a product manager or engineer who doesn't. Like
Yeah.
that, we could. It's a massive catalyst. So I do think we're going to start seeing that. Like we're going to start seeing folks who invest and learn and how to leverage it, and
Mhm.
folks who don't, and that is going to be a material difference in their
Yeah.
outputs.
That seems to be a very common theme amongst many, many job roles, right? And then if you were to draw that thread out a bit more, it sounds like companies which are going to empower their engineers and PMs and let them use all these new tools and instrument their products and, their however they want to instrument their customers and bring all that data to the PM, they can truly empower their PMs to be GMs and get more out of the PMs and the business overall. That sounds like a very compelling argument to make to any CEO, if you ask
Absolutely.
me. Yeah, awesome. Well, it also seemed to me that, if ever you get a chance to work with each other and Chandler plays VP engineering head and Anjan plays product head again, with all this data and AI, maybe there's less room for disagreement, maybe. I don't know.
maybe. Who
I
knows?
doubt it,
You
Chandler.
doubt it. Okay, there'll always be something. All right. Okay, cool. So this is the last section. So have a few rapid fire questions for the two of you. Feel free to give a very brief answer, or if you want to give an explanation, feel free. So Chandler, to you first. So what is the biggest constraint that you think users face today with data?
For me, it's getting their data in one place where they can actually use it. The more you talk to users, they're still using a transactional database for their main application. Their finance departments and the actual data departments themselves are using data warehouses, and they have huge ETL pipelines that get all that data in there. And the two worlds, really aren't communicating very well together, much less with Salesforce and the finance databases and all these other things. So really getting your data in a place where you can actually take advantage of it with all this new great technology, that to me is the biggest challenge most enterprise organizations at least are facing right now.
Gotcha. What about you, Anjan?
For me, I mean, it feels like time's still a constraint. Like you have all this data, but you don't have enough time. So maybe this is where AI is starting to help. But just getting the data in the shape you want and kind of asking the questions, the kind of your basic questions still are the constraints.
Gotcha. Cool. Anjan, pick a role that gets disrupted the most in the coming years. Do you think it may be a data engineer, data scientist, or a software developer?
Maybe take a different view. I think again, we'll see how this plays out, and I kind of generally agree with Chandler that like it's hard to see that like AI kind of disrupting this completely. But I feel each of those professions, if you're deep and you're an expert, you're going to be more productive. And if you're shallow and you're barely kind of doing the scaffolding work, you're going to be less effective. So
Mm.
AI is going to force the experts to be more valuable,
Mhm.
and the folks who deeply understand things to be more valuable, and folks who are shallow to be less valuable. So that's kind of, I don't know if the role, like I think software engineers are going to be more valuable because you could build
Mm.
more things now. Data scientists are going
Mhm.
to be more valuable because you could have more of an impact. But if you're a software engineer that is barely doing scaffolding coding, you're going to
Mhm.
be less valuable.
Gotcha. What do you think, Chandler?
I think software engineering most likely is going to be the most disrupted, especially for more menial tasks that you have to do as a software engineer, writing tests, defining APIs, just structuring projects in general. I think some of these new tools can get you pretty far pretty quickly. Also, just prototyping new ideas. Your
Mm.
PM has some harebrained idea that would take you 5 days to prototype just so you guys can look at it might only take 1 or 2 now. It's just going to make people faster and more effective. Again, I don't think that necessarily means less software engineers. I think it just means more effective software engineers. But we'll have to see how this all plays out. So.
For sure. All right, final question for you, Chandler. Is there an interesting, emerging data related technology or project that you're super excited about?
Oh, good question. What I'm excited about is seeing AI get applied to kind of the operational space with some of this. I think the buzzword right now is agent driven automation kind of stuff. I don't know if I'm using that correctly. I might get the buzzword wrong, but the idea that we can build these agents, these AI agents that take away a lot of the operational tasks for us, making applications more reliable, better uptime, more secure. I think that's a big space. I think AI is going to do a really good job of that. Just, looking for patterns, plugging holes that otherwise would take a human, some kind of manual intervention to do when it's a very automatable task. And I think AI is going to be able to do all of those things we always wish we could have automated as a DevOps engineer back in the day, but we never got around to. I think AI is going to really speed that up. And I'm excited to see what happens in really that security and kind of DevOps world as AI continues to evolve.
That is cool. That is cool. What about you, Anjan? Do you have any favorite?
I'm excited to see where reasoning models go next. It's been fascinating what they could do. Like, will they solve a math problem that no one solved? Or like, that'll be kind of an interesting moment for AI. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious how that space is going to evolve, and it'll have some fascinating impact.
That is awesome. This is super interesting. My favorite thing, the thing that I hope a reasoning model can tell me is, what is the meaning of my life? So that is the thing that I hope a model can answer for me someday. Until then, there's a lot more work to be done. Thank you so much for both of your time. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Vidya. Thanks, Chandler.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.